Okay, so you guys have sent in some really interesting material lately, lots of different ways to like boost sales performance, right? And um, we've spent some time with it all. Like there's this one briefing doc that really lays things out, and there's a Q&A with an actual sales coach, which was like surprisingly good, and there's a bunch more. And like after going through everything, there's this one strategy that just keeps coming up. Feels like it could be like game changing for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're seeing across all these sources is this emphasis on getting ahead of the game, really, and proactive goal setting, planning things out in advance. It's like going beyond just putting in the hours. It's a much more deliberate way of working.
Totally. So what we want to do in this deep dive is really pull apart the key pieces of this strategy. Understand, like, not just what it is they're telling you to do, but why it's supposed to be so effective and how you can actually use it to get clearer on where you're going.
Yeah.
Maybe feel a little less overwhelmed, seriously up your productivity, and ultimately just hit your targets. And what's so cool is that even though this stuff comes from a sales background, the ideas themselves feel so much bigger than that. Like, it's really about upping your game in general,
Mm.
your productivity across the board.
Mm.
So think of this as like getting the inside track on a really pertinent way to get things done.
I think the really intriguing thing here is the underlying promise that you can achieve more by being strategic rather than just like grinding away, just working harder and harder, which is definitely something that resonates with anyone who's ever felt swamped or overwhelmed.
No, for sure. The idea of having a secret weapon for like locking in your focus, right? I'm all ears. Let's get into it. So the big picture here seems to be this shift from just reacting to whatever the day throws at you to really like taking control, being proactive about your goals.
Exactly. And the material we've been looking at really stresses this move from a reactive mindset to a much more pre-planned, deliberate approach.
Okay, so how does that actually work?
Well, they consistently point to two key habits that drive this shift, setting weekly goals and then making nightly preparations.
Got it. And one of the sources really emphasizes Sunday night, they call it your launch pad for a killer week.
Yeah.
So let's walk through that Sunday routine. How do you set yourself up with these weekly goals?
Well, it starts with taking a step back and honestly evaluating the week that just happened, really looking at it critically. And they emphasize like genuine self-reflection here. What did you accomplish? Where did things fall short? They even give concrete examples for sales, like look at the number of calls you made, the deals you closed, and then you use that to pinpoint areas for improvement.
Right. So you've reviewed the past week. Now, what?
Based on that review, you then identify specific areas where you want to focus your energy to see improvement in the coming week. They suggest looking at things like, how much time you're spending prospecting, how consistent you are with follow-ups, are your pitch skills on point? It's about pinpointing those key actions that are going to move the needle.
Okay, so you have a sense of where you've been, where you want to go. Now comes the actual goal setting, and that's where that SMART framework comes in, right?
Yeah.
Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And they give really concrete examples to illustrate this specifically for sales. So think about a goal like increase prospecting calls by 20% this week or close 3 deals by Friday. These aren't vague wishes. They're clearly defined targets that you can actually track and measure within a set time frame.
And I think it's worth adding that while SMART goals are super useful for providing structure, sometimes sticking too rigidly to every single element without flexibility can actually be a bit limiting. The key is to use them as a guide to create well-defined goals, but allow for some wiggle room, as things change.
Oh, absolutely. Adapt as needed.
So final piece of this Sunday night ritual is journaling, right? It's
Yeah.
not just thinking about these goals, you actually have to write them down. What's the significance of that?
They're really big on that. And I think for good reason, the act of journaling helps solidify those goals in your mind. It makes them feel more tangible, more real, and it also significantly increases your accountability.
Okay, I can see that.
When they're written down, they're not just floating around in your head. They become a concrete commitment, harder to ignore. And plus, it gives you something to refer back to throughout the week,
Mhm.
keeps you on track and motivated.
So Sunday sets the stage for the week, but it doesn't end there, right? Then there's this whole nightly routine thing. And one of the sources actually calls this the secret weapon.
Mhm.
Tell me about that. Why is it so important to prepare for the next day every single night?
This daily practice is all about starting each day with intention, with clarity. You're not just waking up and getting swept along by whatever comes at you. So first step is you review your schedule for the following day. What appointments, meetings, commitments are already locked in?
Right. Know what you're working with.
Then you prioritize your tasks, what absolutely needs to get done to move you closer to those weekly goals. One source asks a really powerful question here. What is the one thing you must accomplish tomorrow to significantly advance your objectives that forces you to cut through all the noise and focus on what really matters?
I like that question a lot.
Then from those top priorities, you set specific goals for the day.
Okay, so these daily goals are like mini versions of the weekly goals, right?
Mm.
Equally specific and actionable.
Exactly. And they need to directly support those bigger weekly objectives. So they give examples like close 2 deals, or send follow-up emails to 5 key leads, or finalize prep for tomorrow's client presentation. So you can see how these actions build towards the larger targets.
And just like with the weekly goals, they emphasize journaling these daily plans as well. They call it creating a roadmap for the following day.
It becomes your guide. It helps you stay focused on those priorities, prevents you from getting sidetracked by, all those less important things, and it keeps you aligned with those weekly ambitions. You start the day with intention, not just reacting to whatever emails or requests happen to come in.
So we've covered the weekly planning, the nightly prep, but those are just individual steps. The real power, as one of the sources points out, is in turning these actions into habits, right?
Absolutely. They're very clear that success with this isn't about doing it once in a while. It's about making it a regular part of your routine.
So how do you actually make that happen?
They give some really practical advice. A key suggestion is to start small, especially if this is a big shift for you. Maybe just focus on identifying one crucial daily goal each night until that feels natural.
Makes sense, one step at a time.
They also recommend setting a specific non-negotiable time each evening for your prep routine. Treat it like an important appointment.
Because if it's scheduled, you're more likely to do it.
Right. And then the final piece of advice on habit formation is just be consistent. They acknowledge there will be days when you're tired, unmotivated, but you just got to stick with it. They say consistency builds discipline, and discipline drives results. There's even a quote, "Success isn't luck, it's a habit."
Okay, so we've got the what and the how. Now, let's talk about the why, according to these sources. Why is this approach so effective? What are the benefits?
While the enhanced focus and accountability are huge, the act of journaling your goals, as we talked about, it's more than just a task. It really locks it in. You're much more likely to follow through.
Makes sense, you've made that commitment.
The Sunday review process also gives you this strategic advantage by stepping back and assessing your week before it begins. You're operating with more intention. You're not just getting swept up in the day-to-day. You're actively shaping your week based on your priorities.
So you're thinking bigger picture.
Exactly. And then the nightly prep is where the stress reduction and the productivity boost really come in. By planning the night before, you eliminate that feeling of waking up overwhelmed by like a million things you need to do. You already have a plan, so you can start the day focused and energized. As one source says, you go from reacting to the demands of the day to owning it.
And that feeling of control could be so powerful.
Huge, right? And it all comes back to that idea of making conscious choices about where you direct your effort. That's what they mean by working smart, not just hard.
Okay, so now let's connect this to you, the listener. Regardless of whether you're in sales or a totally different field, think about your own work and your own life.
Yeah.
How could these ideas of proactive planning, structured goal setting apply to you?
Right. What areas could benefit from more intentionality, maybe, where you often feel like you're just reacting to events rather than guiding them?
Could be managing projects, pursuing creative endeavors, hitting fitness, or learning goals. These principles of defining objectives, breaking them down, and regularly assessing your progress. Those seem applicable to so many things.
It's really interesting to see how these seemingly simple habits can provide a framework for achieving pretty much any goal.
Totally. So let's recap the key takeaways. We've explored the power of those weekly SMART goals set on Sunday night, the importance of nightly prep, prioritizing your tasks for the next day, and the absolute need for consistency in turning these practices into habits.
And we've emphasized that this goes way beyond sales. These are fundamental principles for focusing better, being more productive, and ultimately getting where you want to go in any area of your life.
It's not just about techniques. It's about a mindset, right? A way of approaching your goals and feeling more in control.
Absolutely. So here's something to consider. Think about just one area of your week where implementing a Sunday night review and a quick nightly prep could make a difference.
And building on that, here's a final thought. What's one small daily goal you could set for yourself tonight that aligns with a bigger vision you have for your future? Think about it. Play around with these ideas. See what happens. You might be surprised at the impact it can have.